right, we're ready to kind of finish up the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible, which we call the books of Moses. And we've been through Genesis and Exodus and kind of gotten the overall understanding of how God set up his people and how God is setting up his plan of salvation going forward through his people. And we're going to wrap the last 3 books up into this section and just kind of hit them as a highlight. They're important, but we're just going to kind of go through them so you have the overall understanding of why they're there and why they're important. So we get to the book of Leviticus next, and man, these 3 can be really hard books to read: Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, but they're still important. And Leviticus deals with the duties of the Levites, and it's the whole idea of setting aside a priestly section for Israel that would lead them through all their days coming forward. The Levites would be the ones the priests would come from that tribe. But it's also about setting up what we know as holiness, that set apartness. And the reason God does so much detail in this and gives so many rules and laws is because he wants them to understand what it is to be set apart for his purposes. And so the book of Leviticus gives us that. And it may seem like a lot of stuff that we won't ever have to worry about, how to cut a bull up and how to do all the sacrifices, but it's really more about setting them apart and giving them laws that are different from everybody else so that they know they're a special people. There's a spiritual holiness here that's symbolized by physical perfection. So all the things of the sacrifices and the lambs and everything having to be perfect without blemish are a symbol for us physically to know the spiritual perfection that God requires, which would be only found ultimately in Christ, right? And so that's where that comes in. These spiritual conditions for the people are not to be cruel and not to give them a bunch of stuff to do, but simply to set them apart. And it establishes their holy days and their festivals. The book of Numbers is really the story of going from Mount Sinai to the very border of the Promised Land, the land of Moab. And so in the book of Numbers, you get a lot of things. You get the stories, a few more stories in there, the story of the 13 spies that Moses sent in. And the important thing there is, of course, the story there is that 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, see absolute wonder because they know God's going to give them this. They have the faith and trust in God that he's going to present this to them. And so they're in awe of everything. The other spies, the other 10 spies, go into I said 13, I think there's 12 spies. The other 10 are scared to death. They say, oh, this is a scary land. These people are giants. These people are all these things. And it's not that there were really giants in the land by any means, but they saw something that was going to be difficult, and so they got afraid. And that's a great illustration of how we operate in the Spirit when we're trying to trust God for the basic things in life and just walking in our discipleship, right? Sometimes we see the challenges God puts before us and goes, man, God's with me in this. Thank God he's got me. This is going to be wonderful. And we step into those things and allow God to do amazing things through us. Others go, well, that looks pretty hard, and I might have to change some stuff, and I might have to do this. It's just too big. Too big sounds like giants, right? And so we tend to stay away from those things. Well, fortunately for us, Moses understood the 2, who they were, and he understood the wickedness of the others. But this is where we start to understand that this generation is not going to enter the Promised Land. Even Moses won't enter the Promised Land because he had a moment of mistrust for God. And so the Lord organizes Israel into its preparedness as he's continuing to get them ready as a people. They're organized into military camps in Numbers. Now, again, it can be long and monotonous reading through all that. Which tribe had how many men and how many of this. And that's not so much as important as the fact that God organized them into these military camps so they'd be ready for what God was going to do. And so these are the stories that come out of the book of Numbers. There's some beautiful parts of Numbers where we get the Lord's blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you. Balaam and the talking donkey. The story comes in the book of Numbers because Israel is trying to move against God again, and God uses this prophet for hire, so to speak a word into Israel. And so all of that's there, but this is God setting them up, setting them apart, getting them ready. Again, right up to the point of going into the promised land. That's the book of Numbers. Now, if the book of Numbers is about the repetition of the law and who they were and setting them apart in holiness, and it really is that understanding. Deuteronomy is more of the relationship that God has with Moses and with his people. And it's a more loving book. It's more about the passion and love God has for them and his people. In it, we see Moses' farewell address. We see a series of speeches and the covenant being renewed once again. We see the heart of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy, where God interacts with him, and he gets to cry out and say the things to God and to the people he wants to say. And one of the things that we see in Deuteronomy, if you go to the New Testament book, the Gospels, where Jesus is in the wilderness, he quotes Deuteronomy when he says, love God with all your heart, you shall have no, man doesn't live on bread alone. All these come out of Deuteronomy 6 and chapter 8, because Jesus is going back and referring to his own words to Satan in that moment. But these all come out of the heart of Deuteronomy in all of that. It also does one final thing in Deuteronomy, is we see Joshua set up to take the mantle of leadership, and with the preparation of Joshua to take on such a role. And we'll pick up with that next time. So these last three books of Moses, again, don't worry if you get caught up reading them and get kind of bored, because some of it's just long lines of people's names and numbers and all these different things. Kind of read in between all of that and understand that they have a purpose. They have a purpose because God needs people to be set up and understand that they're separate, because when they go into these new lands, into this new promised land, they'll need to keep that separateness. They will need to go in and make sure they know who they are, to keep this separateness alive and real, so that God can bring Messiah out of this people who are set apart for this purpose. And so they'll battle that for many, many years to come, and even in the promised land. But it's important that God take all this time and all this effort to establish them, to make sure that this is ingrained in them, that they are a people set apart. And then, of course, in Deuteronomy, it ends with us seeing the death of Moses and God burying Moses in a place that only God knows. He took care of Moses all the way through because of Moses' faithfulness and willingness to be used. Even though it started reluctantly, it ended well. And so now we've had an overview of these first 5 books that we call the Pentateuch, that these books of Moses, and we understand that now they are set up to enter into the promise and the promised land. And from here out, we will see the progression of God's people getting ready to move forward into a time when Messiah will come. So that wraps up that part, and we'll see you next time.